I'm looking forward to this panel session because not only do we have a distinguished list of speakers with us, but we actually have representatives from each of the main stakeholders in the discussions.
I would start maybe by challenging the title of this session, which refers to a small step for the regulators. I'm not sure that this is a small step. This is a major challenge to start regulating Sepa. I mean, if we go back to the very creation of Sepa, it is true that the project was driven by the regulators through the adoption of a regulation on cross-border payment back in 2001. And then Sepa has been developed by the industry with some major achievements with the launch of the SCT and the SDD. And now we are going back to the regulatory phase because we have received several requests coming from all sides, from national regulators, from the banking industry, from the users, to fix an end date to this process.
Interoperability is very important, especially for public administrations. I'm worried about the different ways that banks tend to implement the SEPA schemes.
It's in the logic of all the project that as long as you have to define rules, it's difficult, but you can achieve consensus. But when you have to implement, then you really realize if you really agree with what you have agreed at the moment of the rule, because then you will have to put money, you will have to invest, and then you exactly understand what you have agreed and what you have to do, and this is not always easy.
And is the challenge getting there internal? You mentioned the ICT partners, or is it the supply side, or is it a combination of issues?
It's a combination of issues. It's also up to now a lack of a sense of urgency, which will definitely be helped by putting in place an end date.
In terms of the supply side, is that too aggressive?
The supply side is very complex. If you analyze nearly 5,000 suppliers of payment services, the majority of them do have concrete services, and also the vendors over here and consulting firms do have concrete solutions. The point is that if you are not clear in the communication when the end date is, the project will never start. And that is one of the weak spots, because if you analyze the total program, Europe is able to manage complex programs. From a program perspective, the command structure is weak, the control structure is weak, and the communication structure is weak. Banks will deliver the services, but the political objective should be explained, in particular in the Euro countries, by the public sector. Ministers of finance and governors of central banks do have an important role to fulfill.
We fully understand the need for clarity. Nevertheless, we have to take into account also the need for the supply and the demand side to make the necessary investment, to get prepared, to prepare themselves for the migration end date, and also to have a proper communication. In our view, communication is a shared responsibility. It is just too easy to say the national regulators, the governors of the central bank are responsible for communication. It is a shared responsibility at the national, at the European level, the demand, the supply side, the national regulators, the EU regulators. We all have to communicate in the best way.
Gerard, one of the points you made in your opening statement was about the competing schemes going forward. I know it's something you feel very strongly about.
I can tell a bit about competing schemes, because that was wording we also recognized in the communication of the Commission. A scheme is also giving clarity on the technical standards, and the technical standards are global standards, the identifiers like BIC and IBAN, but also messaging standards based on the new technology, ISO 20022. Those are rules and standards in the cooperative space, so no competition. So why do we need competing schemes? That's not creating clarity for us.
So is the issue, Jean-Yves, then partly to do with what is a definition of a scheme and what are essential requirements, or has this been misinterpreted as to what you were trying to achieve when this concept was introduced in the first place?
Nothing prevents today, in the absence of a regulation, of a competing schemes to emerge. It is not because you will have a regulation that suddenly competing schemes will emerge. Today we have one scheme which has been developed under the umbrella of the European Payment Council, but maybe some banking communities could have taken the decision to design and to develop an alternative scheme, a competing scheme. This did not happen. And we consider that if the schemes developed by the industry is of good quality, meet the concerns of the users, then there would be no reason to have competing schemes emerging on the market.
In all the debates we had, it's not always clear from the perspective of the customer side. They don't make always the distinction between competitive space and cooperative space. Some representatives believe that all the banks should deliver exactly the same service. It's a view, but it's not the view of the competition authority. So it's sometimes bizarre having the dialogue.
One of the concerns about the essential requirement is not very much the emergence of new EU-wide or SEPA-wide schemes, but rather the persistence of national schemes.
We don't see the risk of keeping the market fragmented through the persistence of improved domestic legacy schemes.
It means that we allow in the euro area clusters of banks continuing with the old world and basically upgrading the old way a bit. So it becomes an archipel where part of the communities are migrating to a new world and some don't. And that will be supported by this approach. I think it's shocking.
Most of the banks in Europe have invested in SEPA. They're big users investing in SEPA. And speaking from a user perspective, in future payment service tenders, we will definitely require SEPA.
The regulation reopen issues that have been settled. This, I think, is extremely dangerous for the credibility of the whole project. So it's really something that has to be avoided at any cost.
Be reassured that our objective is not to lead to a re-fragmentation of the market. Integration still remains the main objective.